Okay, here we go with episode 73. Okay. Whoops, stop. Don't know what just happened. My computer went a little bit weird. Okay. Today on episode 73, it's part of. Nope. Today on episode 73, it's part one of a two-part series on classroom management. This is by far all new teachers' biggest struggle, so I'm going to break it down for you into manageable parts. Then there'll be, ow, and then there'll be the intro, and then, here we go. Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lepre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. I'm super excited to be discussing the topic today on classroom management. I know that it's been a long time coming, and it's something that I've been thinking about actually since I started podcasting. I was wondering how I was going to approach this classroom management conversation because it's not easy and it does take some time. So I decided that in order to do this well, I needed to break this up into two parts. So I have this part where I'm going to be talking about sort of like more of the mindset of classroom management. And then in the next episode, it's going to be the application and practical parts. And then we have an ad. Okay. Nope. With the school year right around the corner, or maybe for some of you like me, it's already started, you really have to have your classroom management solid. This is a topic that many new teachers are frustrated with, and it's the one thing that can actually make you sort of throw your hands up and want to give up. And since it's a complex topic, I really felt that this should be split into two episodes. Now, classroom management isn't so much about discipline and rules and consequences as much as it is about preventing negative behaviors from arising in the first place. I mean, if you think about it, it's like our health. It's easier and cheaper to prevent illness rather than treating it. So, if you set the right learning environment and have positive relationships with all of your students, they are less likely to misbehave or try to push those boundaries. But for when they do misbehave and they're not following rules, that's when we have the classroom management plan in place so that we can get them back on track. For some of our toughest students, they struggle to read, write, and do math, right? Or they just hate it altogether. They channel this frustration and shame into negative behaviors as a coping mechanism. You'll also find that they'll stonewall or refuse to work because they don't want other students to know that they're not capable. In their mind, you can't criticize their work, nor will they come off as stupid if they haven't given you anything to criticize. Does that make sense? You can't give them any negative feedback on their work if there's no work present. Now, once they fall behind, though, it obviously gets tougher for them, so they start really making their coping mechanisms part of that mindset. It just almost becomes part of who they are. And reading and writing, or even math, it most likely has been boring for a lot of your students, especially those struggling ones. And math, man, for a lot of them, it doesn't make any sense at all. Or on the flip side, they could also be completely bored out of their minds because they already know this and your topic is easy for them and they act up to entertain themselves. Either way, both situations suck for you as a teacher. And unless the right conditions are set, these factors will lead to more students misbehaving or checking out in your class. So, as I mentioned in the introduction for this two-part series, I'm going to dive into both the whoops. I'm going to dive both into the mindset part of it and the practical aspects of classroom management. And as you're listening, I want you to think about your own interactions with students, maybe, through tutoring, maybe you're a camp counselor, maybe through student teaching, okay? The policies that have been passed down from others that you've tried out, and how to create a system that works with your own personality and teaching style. All right, so let's start with the mindset. So first, in order to figure out what kind of classroom management plan you want, you have to learn how students at this age, no, I said that wrong. So first, in order to figure out what kind of classroom management plan you want, you have to first learn everything you can about child development for the students you teach and use that to frame how you handle your classroom. Your expectations definitely have to be in line with what can be expected of them. So this means that you'll have to work with younger kids, more on things like impulse control, and then older kids being more responsible and respectful. I mean, obviously this could apply to either age, but you know what I mean in terms of what the main struggles are. There are a lot of articles, blog posts, podcasts, and books about kids at the particular age that you teach. So, research all of that, take notes on key points that could affect how they behave in class. And don't skimp on this part, you guys, especially if you're new to teaching a certain grade, because it's key to your classroom management plan. So once you have a working knowledge of what your students are going through at that age, you'll know what behaviors to expect. What then does your ideal classroom look like? If you expect a group of middle school students to sit quietly and be completely engaged in your lesson for 60 minutes, you'll be disappointed on a daily basis. If students, tapping and squirming while sitting on the ground and random outbursts annoys you, then you need to find a way to get past that if you teach elementary. And you have to take what is normal for their age, combine it with what students need to learn, and determine how you'll communicate your expectations to them. For example, a lot of 7th graders hate drawing attention to themselves, and that's why so many of them don't want to raise their hand to volunteer in class. So with that in mind, I have policies that allow them to be more subtle when they need something. If they need to go to the bathroom, they just cross their fingers, kind of like, promising something, and hold it up and patiently wait for me to make eye contact and nod at them. No discussion is needed, no interruption of the lesson, and they are eternally grateful that they don't have to raise their hand. If they need a tissue to blow their nose, they don't need to ask. It doesn't bother me if they get up because the rest of us are so engaged in the lesson. Plus, if they ask to get a tissue, then people's attention is on a student walking to the tissue box and listening to them blow their nose. Younger students, they enjoy and are more receptive to something like call and response. So if you do something like clap once if you hear me, clap twice if you hear me, or maybe if you put the peace sign in the air, or some teachers say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm waiting for quiet. Those work really well with younger students. And if you tried that with older students, they find it cheesy and they are less likely to respond without a good dose of sarcasm and probably some eye rolling. Now, when it comes to transitions between activities, what can you reasonably expect? If you just spent time doing direct instruction for 30 minutes, your students will most likely talk during a transition. It's okay. Let them empty the cup a bit. Let them talk. And just know that there's going to be talk. And if anything, maybe you could even direct the conversation of what they're going to talk about while they're transitioning. So with elementary students, you'll probably have to show them specific routines in terms of how to take out certain supplies, where to put them on their desk, etc. And with secondary students, they need less hand holding and will actually be annoyed if they feel like you're nagging or trying to mother them. All right. Now, in episode 70, I discussed the importance of being an engaging teacher. And this is important because when you're engaging, the students are obviously engaged and you'll have fewer problems. So if you want to have, why is this skipping around? This is literally skipping around. Okay. So if you want more information on how to not only make your lessons more engaging, but also deliver them in an engaging way, then you want to check out episode 70. Because here's the thing. One of the many reasons why students misbehave is boredom. They already know that, why? They may already know the material that you're teaching, or on the flip side, they may be confused and don't want to ask. But if your student engagement is high, they won't have as many opportunities to be disruptive. This doesn't mean that you have to be like bouncing off the walls and hyper to entertain students. We're not here to keep them entertained, okay? And not everything has to be fun, even though the kids want it all to be fun. But your delivery and content should be engaging enough that they want to pay attention and work with their group. If you're quiet and you're meek and monotone, then even the best student will space out and stop listening. So you want to make the material engaging. You also want to make it rigorous and relevant to students while also offering certain students enough scaffolding to where they feel like they can be successful. So not only do you want to know what students are capable of or what to expect from them at this age, you also want to make sure that you're thinking about student and child development when it comes to engagement, because also engaging them at different ages is different. All right, so let's come up with a plan. Now that you know what to expect from your students at this age, you need to decide on a classroom management plan. Now, this includes your rules and consequences. So when we think of rules, we can't help but think of the things students shouldn't be doing. I mean, in our minds, we can picture all of the behaviors that we don't want to see, right? But unless you want your rules to be about the things, nope. But you want your rules to be about the things that they should do so that learning can happen in a safe and caring and, dare I say, fun environment. You want a rule to be phrased in such a way that it's obvious that by not following the rule, we can't get on with the fun stuff and learning. So we don't want to necessarily assume that they're going to do bad things, but it's pretty obvious that if you don't do these things, we can't learn, right? And you've probably already heard this, but you also want to make your rules apply to multiple situations, in that you want the rules to blanket a lot of different behaviors. You don't want to have 20 different rules. The kids will never remember that, nor will they really look at it, even if it's on a chart. And you have to think about your own teaching philosophy and craft rules around that. For example, something as simple as respect yourself, others, and learning. That encompasses so many possible scenarios. If a student answers out loud without raising their hand, they're not respecting others and learning. Same goes if they're talking to a student across the room, or if a student is eating or chewing gum in class, they're also not respecting others or learning. Do you see that? Come prepared to learn is another simple rule that can apply to multiple situations, such as bringing your materials, staying awake in class, doing your homework on time, studying for tests. So that particular rule, if they didn't bring their iPad to class, then they broke the rule, come to class prepared. Or if they're overly tired, you can say, well, you didn't prepare for class by going to bed on time. Okay. You can also make a specific rule, such as only water is allowed to be consumed. I personally have that rule because I don't want any food or colored drinks in my class. We have an ant problem in our school, and even one crumb will bring on like 100 ants. So that's one rule that doesn't encompass a lot of different things, but one that I have to point out to students. So once you've crafted your rules, we have to start thinking about the part that's not so fun, that I think we struggle with the most, and that is what's going to happen when one of these rules is actually broken. You want to really think about this, because whatever you choose, you must enforce it, even if it's broken right after you get done explaining the rule. If you've ever seen a consequence in action that made you cringe, like maybe during an observation, don't use it. If you felt sorry for a student after a consequence, don't use it. If you felt like it was fair and effective, then use it. That's how you know whether or not a rule is going to work for you. So most teachers start out with a verbal warning, or they give the teacher look, and you want to explain to students that this is their only time to fix the problem before you start implementing consequences. So fair warning, if I give you that look, especially if I have to give you that look and say your name, that's it. That's your warning. And why do I only give one warning? Well, ask yourself this. How many times do you want to stop instruction for this student? If they see that they get multiple warnings, they'll keep acting up until they've used all of the warnings. They're just going to push the boundaries. They're going to see how far they can go. So you have to be clear about this, and more importantly, you have to stick to the consequences. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. So what happens the second time that they break a rule? Maybe talking out of turn or yelling across the room. Well, that's up to you. For younger students, a timeout situation tends to work as long as it's not too lengthy. If you give a student a timeout, though, it helps to follow up with a discussion in that timeout. Otherwise, they can kind of see the timeout as like a reward because they get out of doing work. Now, for secondary students, I found that relocating them helps. You might want to consider having an empty seat near the back where they can go and where they won't try to be the center of attention. And this also allows you to have a private conversation with them once you get the class working. And maybe you're afraid to do that because you think, well, they're just going to sit there and do nothing. Well, that's fine. I'd rather have them sit there and do nothing than be a disruption in front of the class. They can just catch up on their work later on or not, and then we have to have a separate conversation about that. Now, for me, whenever I have to relocate a student, I keep track of it. If I'm having to do this several times a week, I make sure to inform the parent. You don't want to give them detention or send them to the office without any warning. That's a sure way of ruining any chance of working with the parent or having them cooperate. So keep track of it and be specific when you're telling the parent on which days or how many days a week and exactly what you did. Some teachers, they use things like Class Dojo and they assign daily points for behavior and deduct those for each infraction. Others have students write a reflection sheet. Some have their students stay in during recess or lunch. I've seen that quite a bit. Whatever you choose, though, be consistent and fair. If you know that a certain consequence makes you uncomfortable, or you kind of end up coming up with reasons why, this instance doesn't count, then it's not a good consequence. It has to be something that you're really willing to enforce. And you want to make sure that you're aware of any school policies when it comes to discipline. You want to follow all of the protocols before a student is ever sent to an administrator. And usually it means dealing with it in-house and you talking to the parent. You don't want to send a student to your administrator without having contacted the parent first. Otherwise, two bad things will happen. The parent will be angry that you never told them and let your administrator know that. And your administrator will resent you for putting them on the spot like that. And so it's just a doubly bad situation. So even if you're afraid to call parents about this and it makes you uncomfortable, you have to contact the parent and make sure they got it. So you can't just email and say, well, I emailed the parent. You want to elicit some sort of response so that you know that they read it. And if you're at a loss in terms of what your classroom management plan should be, ask other teachers on your team or those that teach your grade. Go on social media and ask your tribe. Be aware that some of their policies can be on either the extreme of lenient or draconian, but it'll at least give you an idea of what others are using successfully. I also suggest that you observe a teacher that has amazing classroom management in the same style as yours. So, you want to pick their brains, even if they're a teacher that teaches a different grade or subject. And you can tell, like during your planning period, you walk by and their students are doing exactly what you want your students to do. And the teacher's style, whether it be more upbeat or more serious, it aligns with yours. That way you know that whatever they end up telling you, it's something that you'd be a little more comfortable implementing. So find out what they're doing, how they teach students the policies, what has and hasn't worked in the past, all of it. Take notes and then start trying stuff out. When you're starting out as a teacher, you're going to try out a lot of different systems until either you fine-tune those or you find the right one based on trial and error. But, be willing to take risks and see what works for you. You'll also find that both your teaching philosophy and your delivery and your presence in front of your students will change over time. So be thoughtful and reflective throughout this process so that you can find something that fits. So I hope that this will give you something to really chew on and think about this week. I want you to come up with a plan before you listen to next week's episode on implementing it. So do your homework, talk to other teachers, do some research on child development for the age that you teach, and just kind of sketch out something rough, some rules and some consequences. And then next week when we talk about, teaching it and applying it, you'll be ready to go.